If we do what is right now, in 1963, we must set aside substantial areas of our country for all the people who are going to live in it by the year 2000. Where 180 million Americans now live, by the year 2000, there will be 350 million of them.
Either we stop the poisoning in our air, or we become a nation in gas mass, groping our way through these dying cities and a wilderness of ghost towns that the people have evacuated.
The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
And accelerate development of technology to capture energy from the sun and the earth for this and future generations.
If we fail to act soon, we will face an economic, social, and political crisis that will threaten our free institutions.
We must and will be sensitive to the delicate balance of our ecosystems, the preservation of endangered species, and the protection of our wilderness lands.
It's been said that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And when our children look back on this time and this place, they will be grateful.
If we fail to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, deadly heat waves and droughts will become more frequent, coastal areas will flood, and economies will be disrupted. That is going to happen unless we act.
And here we have a serious problem. America is addicted to oil.
I'm 87 years old. I was a child during the Depression. The Great Depression had an enormous influence on the lives of all of us that experienced it. I lived in the country. I'm a country boy, small town kid. We didn't have electricity. We learned to live simply and get our sustenance from the earth. I didn't own a car until I was 27. I grew up with conservation because it was important for our lives. Then after the war, everybody thought they ought to have a chance to be rich.
An enormous economic boom going on after the war. There was this progress is our most important product feeling to the 1950s. And I was one of many relatively spoiled children of that compared to the people who grew up with the Depression. When I was a kid growing up in Rockford, Illinois, I was reading Outdoor Life, and I took the conservation pledge. I give my pledge as an American to save and faithfully to defend from waste the natural resources of my country, its soil and minerals, its forests, waters, and wildlife. And that's me at age 10 or something like that. I got rubber stamps that I put on all my books that said that. And I guess like a lot of that generation, as I saw pieces of that childhood destroyed in one way or another that you couldn't go back to, then you get that sense of angst of, well, how much of this process of loss is going to go on?
I grew up in a beautiful Midwest town. You drove around and it was a green, peaceful, relatively intact system. I really never was confronted with issues of scarcity, pollution, man's impact on the planet. These things just didn't come up for me. In those days, environmental problems didn't really impress themselves on you. It wasn't clear that we had any very serious problems.
Americans want to believe in a future that is expansive, that's better than the past. When I was a kid, the year 2000 was 40 years in the future, and the sort of thing that the futurists were all laying out was almost unimaginable. That never seemed to me to be a particularly interesting way to live. I always thought and kind of held a mental model that somehow we would all find a way to live in something more like a New England village. We would know our neighbors. We would have genuine say in decisions that were made that would impact our lives. This always seemed to me a far superior future.
I voted for the Interstate Highway Program, which I see now as a great mistake. I was a freshman congressman. You went along for the ride? The vision we had was superabundance. There was no discussion of how much oil we had. There was just an assumption that it would always be there and they would always be finding more oil and oil would be cheap. And so the automobile culture that we adopted began to gain strength. Let the trains and public transportation go. That's what we did in most parts of the country. This was the future, the individual, the automobile.